Hello everyone, welcome to our second last training video in our series in Matthew's Gospel, King Jesus from betrayal to glory, and we're finally at the part of glory, looking at Matthew 28 verses 1 to 15, the empty tomb. And what does it mean? What does the empty tomb mean? And what do you believe? But before we get into the passage, it's just worthwhile just saying what's happening in April. There are 2 studies left in April. So the week of Easter, that's next week, the week of the 14th to the 18th of April, we're looking at this passage, Matthew 28, verse 1 to 15. And then the week after Easter, the week of the 21st to the 25th of April, it's Matthew 28, verse 16 to 28. And then we have another school holidays. So if you've missed doing a social in the previous school holiday, which just finished, well, you got another one. And so you can organize a social or even catch up if you've missed a study, or even if you like, you can break up these passages and maybe stretch it over 2 weeks. It depends on you. But after the school holidays, we finally begin with the renewal series, which you're going to hear about at Leaders Training in May. So it starts in May. And you're going to hear about it in Leaders Training this Saturday. But looking at our passage, looking at the context, I want you to think about the time of the end, as Daniel puts it, and another passage in Daniel regarding the Son of Man. So significantly, notice how Daniel chapter 12 describes what's going to happen at the time of the end, if you go read the whole chapter. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. Here's the idea of resurrection. Some to everlasting life, so a glorious resurrection, and some to shame and everlasting contempt, the final judgment, the day of the Lord. And those who are wise, of course those who follow the Lord, shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness, so this is the wise, like the stars forever and ever. So notice, they won't just be resurrected, they'll be glorified. So keep that in mind. That's going to happen at the time of the end. So keep that in mind. But also keep in mind Daniel 7, verse 13 to 14. Because in chapter 26, when Jesus was tried by the Jewish leaders, he explicitly points to this passage being him. Also in chapter 24 and 25, Jesus describes himself as this figure coming on the clouds. I saw in the night visions, and behold, the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man on the clouds, and he came to the Ancient of Days, God, and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and the kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. So notice, keep this in mind, this language, for the next part of Matthew 28, because this is the significance of the resurrection. But key here is his dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So the question you've got to ask yourself, if he's going to have an everlasting dominion, what does that mean for Jesus who is dead? He's dead. So how is this going to be solved? He's not on the clouds of heaven. He's in the earth, in a tomb. So how does it move from where Jesus is dead to here? Similarly, in David's Psalms, like Psalm 16, which Peter quotes in his sermon in Acts chapter 2, God's anointed one, he says, "For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, and you will not let your Holy One see corruption." But Jesus' soul has gone to Sheol. He's seen corruption. So what does that mean? Similarly, in Psalm 22, which Jesus prayed on the cross, the psalm ends with a real sense of triumph and deliverance. I mean, hear these words: "For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. He has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him." Jesus cried to him. As the Son of David, Jesus prayed David's prayer, but he's died. Where's the deliverance? Where's the everlasting dominion? Similarly, the suffering servant, and you can go read Isaiah 52 and 53, because prior to this verse I have here for you, it talks about how the suffering servant or the servant will give his life, or he'll be buried, and yet it is the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief when he makes his soul, notice, as an offering for guilt, which we saw on the cross. But notice this, he shall see his offspring. How will he see his offspring if he's dead? He shall prolong his days, and the will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. How's this even possible if Jesus is dead? We can see the first part, but how about the second part? The everlasting dominion. How does that work? But then moving on, we also see Jesus points to another Old Testament passage for us to consider, which we saw in Matthew 12, verses 39 to 40. When the Jewish leaders were asking for a sign, keep this in mind, Jesus calls them an evil and adulterous generation seek for a sign. But no sign will be given it except for the sign of the prophet Jonah. And this is key, for as Jonah were 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, notice the parallel that he makes between himself. And notice he says the Son of Man. So this seems to solve the conundrum that we see. So will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights. Notice this, in the heart of the earth. This is Jonah's language. And Jesus kept saying, by the way, he will rise on the 3rd day. And what's significant here, and you should do this, is go read Jonah chapter 2, verses 1 to 9. Because notice what Jonah says, I called out to the Lord, and Jesus did call out to the Lord on the cross. My God, he prayed out of my distress. Notice this, and he answered me. Where did he deliver him from? Out of the belly of Sheol I cried. That's how he describes his ordeal in the depths of the sea, in the belly of the fish. It's Sheol. And you heard my voice. And notice how he describes Sheol. Like the waters that he's in. The waters closed in over me to take my life. I lost my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head. Notice this, at the roots of the mountains I went down to the land. Notice, in the heart of the earth, whose bars closed upon me forever. Because Sheol is like a prison that you cannot come from. But, says Jonah, you brought up my life from the pit. And Jesus saying, that's me. That's going to happen to me. It is interesting that the Jewish leaders at the cross, as Jesus is busy dying and suffering, they ask for a sign again. Notice, let him come down now from the cross and we will believe him. So they're like, show us a sign. Well, they're going to get a sign. The sign of Jonah. The sign of being brought up from Sheol, out of the depths of the earth, released. The resurrection. But I want you to see something as we consider this, because we looked at this with the cross as well, with the day of the Lord, and now also with the end of time, with the time of the end, as Daniel puts it. Just as in the cross of Jesus, we see the end. It's like the end has been brought forward at the cross. We see the day of the Lord, the great day of God's judgment and wrath on the cross. So also we see the time of the end, which happens at the second coming, brought forward in the resurrection. There's a reason Jesus is called the first fruits of the new creation, of that future resurrection. You can go read 1 Corinthians 15 verses 20 to 58, or Acts 26, or Revelation 21 to 22, or 20 to 22, and you'll see this. What happens at the cross, what happens at the resurrection, is the end. This is the second coming, if you like, brought forward into the present. We see it. We see the end in Jesus' death and in Jesus' resurrection. Just as God's deliverance of his people from the dead, like Noah and the ark, and Isaac being offered and then not, Moses passing through with the people of Israel through the depths of the sea, but Pharaoh does not. David delivered from his trials, the servant of the Lord seeing his offspring, Jonah coming out of Sheol. All these things, by the way, or the eternal Son of Man having eternal dominion, they all foreshadow, they all point forward to the resurrection. And when we look at the resurrection, look at the cross, we actually see both of these point forward to the end of time, because that's what they are. In so many ways, everything that the Old Testament points forward to is fulfilled in the cross and resurrection of Jesus. And everything that's going to happen at the end of time, at the day of the Lord, is seen at the cross and resurrection of Jesus. It's like a focal point in all of history. But what happened so far, just to remind you, is that the Jewish leaders, they've set a guard on Jesus' tomb, because they remember what Jesus said in chapter 12. And they're like, we have to guard him until the third day. Remember the sign of Jonah, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people. So notice, this is what they're concerned about. Just remember the phraseology here, because you'll see the level of their deception. And then, very importantly, there were some disciples, not the 12 or the 11, who witnessed Jesus' death and burial. We have Joseph of Arimathea, because it was his tomb that was given to Jesus, and he took Jesus' body. And then, significantly, the woman, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. They witnessed Jesus' death, they witnessed Jesus' burial, and now they're going to receive the greatest privilege. They're going to be the first witnesses of Jesus' resurrection. But looking at the structure of our passage, I just want to point out to you, there's a sandwich here. So it begins with the Christian understanding of the empty tomb in verses 1 to 10, and it ends with the Christian understanding the significance of Jesus' resurrection. That Son of Man, Daniel passage comes to the fore again. So these two relate to one another, but the narrative is interrupted by the middle part, which is the false view of the Jewish leaders. And it sort of poses a challenge to you. What do you believe? But let's get into it, the Christian understanding of the empty tomb. Now, after the Sabbath, this is the third day. Towards the dawn of the first day, that's the Sunday of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, who witnessed Jesus' death, who witnessed Jesus' burial, went to see the tomb. Now, notice the language of seeing and hearing. And see, behold, there was a great earthquake. Now, again, remember, this is day of the Lord, the end of time, future judgment language. So we're seeing the end here. For an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, as it will be when the Son of Man comes. And he came and rolled back the stone and sat on it, and his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. If you go read Matthew 24, this is an image or description even of the second coming in some regards, with the angels coming to gather his people. But the appearance of this messenger is very much like the messengers Daniel sees, and the angels or messengers or cherubim that Ezekiel sees. And the response of the guards who are there, who see this phenomena, is quite normal. If you read Revelation, when John sees Jesus, or Ezekiel, and there are other prophets as well, when they see God or hear God or see something of his glory or an angelic figure, they have great fear. The guards trembled and became like dead men. They're absolutely overwhelmed by the theophany. They're absolutely overwhelmed by what they're seeing. But this messenger, this angel, does not speak to the guards. He speaks to the women. And he says to the women, not to the guards, and we'll see later why, do not be afraid. They don't have to be afraid. Why? For I know that you want to see Jesus who was crucified. So notice they came to see a crucified Jesus. But he's not here. This is the message, for he has risen. And again, notice, you should know this, as he said. He has risen. You're not going to find the crucified Jesus. No, he's risen. Come and see the place where he lay. You're going to see it's empty. See. And then, how significant. Go quickly. Don't take your time. Go quickly and tell his disciples. Notice, the disciples who abandoned him and are now hiding. Peter, who denied him and wept bitterly. You go to them and tell them he has risen from the dead, just as he said. At sea, he's going before you to Galilee, where you first met him. As this gospel began, there you will meet him, and there you will see him. See, I have told you, you've seen, you've heard. Go Be a witness of what you've seen. He has risen. The tomb is empty. But they don't just get to see an empty tomb and hear the message that he is risen. So notice, so they departed. This is the woman. Quickly, as they were commanded to, they believe and they go from the tomb with fear, which is understandable, given the theophany or seeing the messenger, and great joy, because this is fundamental news or phenomenal news. And they ran. Notice how quickly they go to tell his disciples. They really believe what they have seen and what they've heard. And then they see, behold, Jesus. They don't just hear of the risen Jesus and what he has said, they see him. Jesus met them and said, greetings. They see him. They heard him. And notice how they respond. They came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. And quite significantly in the scriptures, whenever one of God's people tries to worship an angelic figure, a messenger of the Lord, they prevent them from doing so. You see that especially in the book of Revelation, when John now and again forgets who's speaking to him, and the messenger reminds him, I'm just a servant like you. But notice here, Jesus does not stop them from worshiping him, because he is Emmanuel, God with us. He is the Son of Man as well, the Son of David, but he's also Emmanuel. He deserves our worship. But notice they feel and touch him. They see, hear, feel him. And then Jesus said to them, again, just like the figure, the messenger, do not be afraid. And he repeats the message, go and tell, and significantly, my brothers, to go to Galilee where we first met, and there they will see me. So notice they have to hear the message first, these disciples, and then by faith go to see him. But significantly, he calls them his brothers. And I want to remind you why. Because at the Lord's Supper, what did Jesus do? He gave them his body. He gave them his blood. He gave them himself, his whole self, his life for the forgiveness of their sins. He knew what they're going to do, and he absorbed their debt on the cross. He's reconciled himself to them. He has forgiven them. He does not call them his enemies, even though they have abandoned him and denied him. He calls them my brothers. We are reconciled because of what he's done on the cross, giving his body and blood for them, which the Lord's Supper points to. The question is, will they believe and go and see him, which we'll see later on. And that's how the narrative ends at this stage, and then suddenly it's interrupted by this middle part, which is the false view. And remember everything we know about the Jewish leaders. So while they were going, the woman, because they just saw, heard, and felt Jesus, they've heard the message, they're going quickly. Behold, see, some of the guard, those who were there, those who saw this messenger, absolutely terrified. They received no comfort from the messenger, and now we see sort of why. They went into the city, and notice who they go to. They told the chief priests all that had taken place. Notice the guards are sadly behaving just like Judas. They go to the Jewish leaders in their distress, like Judas in his distress went to the Jewish leaders. And we're going to see them behaving like Judas in another way as well. And when they had assembled, this is now the chief priests with the elders, those are the ones who plotted Jesus' death and all of this, who've taken counsel together to destroy Jesus. Notice they go to their former plan like they did with Judas. They gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers. Money. This is their modus operandi. They use people's idol, their God, what they devote themselves to, and in this case, money, mammon. And they use our idols or people's idols to tempt and deceive them to do their bidding. They really do behave like Satan, agents of Satan, a brood of vipers. Notice, they have no intention to listen to the sign of Jonah that they just heard of. In fact, the very thing they're trying to prevent, that the idea that the disciples would steal. Now it's clear the disciples did not steal Jesus. And so instead of preventing it, now they're going to make it the lie. So they're going to pay them, give them money to deceive, tell the people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And again, this is a serious thing for a soldier or guard, because I think the penalty for failure is death. And so if this comes to the governor's ears, which would be really bad for them, don't you worry about it. We will satisfy him, bribe him, and keep you out of trouble. So notice what they do. They appease people, deceive people, tempt people to do their will by spreading deception. And here's the tragedy. The guards, like Judas, took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread sadly among the Jews to this day. And so truly they are, as Jesus said, an evil and adulterous generation, because even when they receive the sign of Jonah, they do not believe it, and they prevent people, again, living up to their character as agents of Satan. They prevent people from entering God's kingdom, like Judas, and when they're done with them, they make them twice as much the child of hell, as they are using people's idols to make them this way. And so we have two witnesses going out. We have the witness of the women who testify to what they've seen and heard and felt, touched, and the guards who are motivated by money and by the Jewish leaders through that money to spread a lie. And so here at this moment, you need to see the contrast between the witness of the women and the soldiers. You also need to see consistently throughout this gospel who the Jewish leaders are and how they operate. They are agents of Satan, where they spread the lie, deceive and tempt people into idolatry, which ultimately leads to people suffering the full consequences of their sin, their idolatry, their rebellion, which is destruction and death. And so you are challenged by these witnesses. And the real question for a first-time reader and for you and me is, who do you believe? And this is what we need to walk away with in this second last training video in Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 to